And here she comes down to the basement. Rachel Pacheco's here. How are you?
I'm doing great. It was a great catch up with your mom, and I'm excited to catch up with you now.
Well, I'm glad that you could put Texarkana on the world tour, and I'm sure you don't get many opportunities to stop in a beautiful city like ours, Rachel.
Happy to be here.
Let's kick this off because you got a great tip, I think, that's a good start to our discussion from a friend of yours named Sandy. Tell me Sandy's story.
So Sandy was one of the first people I met when I became the chief people officer of a small healthcare startup. Sandy and I, like most of the other employees, we grabbed coffee, and Sandy had just been promoted to a role as manager. And Sandy had actually joined the startup 2 years earlier, fresh out of college, and was a superstar performer and doing really well in her role. And of course, promoted to a manager as the startup grows and as they're looking for high performers. And so I'm sitting with Sandy and we're chatting, and Sandy had just gotten her first performance review back that talked about feedback from her team and her direct reports. And Sandy was almost in tears because it became really clear that Sandy was awful at managing. She had been a high performer through college and through school and in her first role. And she just was terrible at managing. And the folks she was managing were miserable. Sandy was miserable. And what I realized was that most people in the organization just had no idea how to manage. And were put in positions of management without any training or role models or resources to be successful in this role.
So you think about management as this different skill, as a skill, but you say that management's not a skill, Rachel. It's a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah. And I talked to a bunch of founders and CEOs, and the conversation is pretty typical in that they say, hey, can you train our team on management? We need better management skills. My pushback is, well, management is a whole bunch of different things. It's how do you set goals for your team? How do you give feedback? How do you have difficult conversations? How do you fire someone? How do you create a team culture? And what I try to emphasize is the idea that management is a whole bunch of skills, and we need to work and build each of them to be a great manager. It's just not one monolithic thing.
I remember talking to Ashley Goodall about this, who with Marcus Buckingham wrote this great piece for the Harvard Business Review talking about how important it is that we train our managers as well. Because when we talk about culture, Rachel, you've seen it at the different companies that you've been involved with, that you've consulted with. Creating this culture really comes down to having a management team that can empower your people.
It's so true. And yeah, I love Ashley and Marcus's piece on performance management, and I use it quite a bit. And I would just add one thing, and that's we're going through this period of the great resignation, as folks are calling it, where people are essentially fleeing their jobs that they've been at over the last number of years because of burnout, because of disillusionment. And people leave jobs because of their managers. And so even more so now, we have such a responsibility in being great managers and training great managers. Our teams will flee, and folks will leave, and we won't be able to keep and retain great talent. And so I just think it's so important for companies and organizations to invest in building a great set of managers.
It's funny when you say great set of managers, you point out in the introduction to your book that this isn't just managing people at work. I mean, this is even great. You say for spouses. And I even think about, people ask me all the time about what questions should I ask a financial planner? How do I set expectations? This is really life advice as much as anything, Rachel.
Probably my favorite quote in the whole book came from a conversation I was having with a dear friend about dating. She was dating this guy and it wasn't going quite well and didn't know what to do and all this kind of stuff. And her dad actually said to her, well, an expectation unarticulated is a disappointment guaranteed. So essentially, if you don't tell the guy what you're looking for, what you want out of the relationship, you're going to be disappointed. Expectation setting is the first chapter in my book, and I think it should be the first chapter in any new relationship or any new marriage, because it absolutely carries over from the workplace to the home and beyond.
I totally agree with that. Although I read sometimes from money nerds that if you sit down and talk about your credit score on date number one, I mean, maybe that's fine. It just isn't where true romance always begins. Why don't we set clear expectations? Because it seems like everybody wants them, right? I want to know how to succeed, but why don't we do that?
I think for new managers, there are two primary things. The first is new managers are petrified of being perceived as micromanagers. So we've all had micromanagers in the past, someone who gets way too deep into your work business, doesn't get off your back when you're doing work. So when we become managers, we say, well, we're never going to be a micromanager. And what being a micromanager means in our minds is we're going to be the fun hip manager that doesn't tell our team what to do and isn't quote unquote bossy. So because of this fear of micromanagement, we aren't clear around what we want and what we expect from our team members, or, we're not even clear around when a project or a task is due. So I think the first thing is just this fear of micromanagement. The second reason why we often don't set clear expectations, it's actually this effect called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. These two economists developed. And that's when we're really good at something, we underestimate the time and the knowledge it takes to get something done. So we're not setting clear expectations because we just assume that our team member knows how to do it and that they know exactly what's expected and that we don't have to make something that's really easy for us. We don't need to be clear about that with our team members because of this Dunning-Kruger effect.
I had to laugh because I had this happen to me, Rachel, in 7th grade math. Like the reason I became a math nerd much later on was because in 7th grade, I had this teacher and he would put stuff on the board and I knew nothing about any of the stuff he was talking about. And I really already had this complex in middle school, probably puberty and everything else going on that I felt like I was behind in everything. And I just felt like life was moving fast and I couldn't keep up. And he puts this stuff on the board behind him. And then he would go, but of course you already know that. And he'd erase it right away. And I feel like since then, I see that all the time around me. People are like, but you already know that. And assuming that we already know that, I think is difficult. And I feel like also the downside, like for me to overcome that math hurdle was so big. You had it with a report named Michael. And I thought Michael was a pretty powerful story because there can be a significant downside for not getting stuff through to people.
Yeah. Michael was the first person I managed and probably the story that sticks with me the most. We were working in a consulting firm. He was my first direct report and I didn't know how to manage and I did a really terrible job. I wasn't clear around what he needed to do to be successful. I wasn't clear on what I expected from him, any of these things. And so unsurprisingly, he failed at his job. It was probably 50% me and 50% that it wasn't the right fit for him. It sticks with me because it's a reminder of how much responsibility we have in our role as managers to help our team members succeed. Michael ended up exiting the organization. It was my first conversation where I had to let someone go. And that was really formative. Part of the reason why I'm still okay with sharing this story and I feel good about it as an example is that Michael ended up leaving the consulting firm, ended up going to Harvard Law School and clerking for a Supreme Court judge. So the role was not right for him. And perhaps if I had been a better manager, he would be toiling away as a consultant now, as opposed to, his true calling, which was to be an incredibly successful lawyer.
Well, that's what I thought when I read that was how often do these rock stars slip through our fingertips because of the fact that we don't have the skills to do our job better?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's get clear then. Let's talk about how we set expectations. You say there's 4 things that we need to do to set clear expectations for people around us.
Yeah. And I call it the super simple 4-pronged approach. And it's super simple because at first glance, it just seems obvious, but the power is in actually doing them and going through each of these steps, which is what we often don't do. And so the first step is stating the objective or the end goal. So, why do we need this work product? What are we trying to achieve with this work? What impact will it have? So this is really the why. So when we're assigning a task or an activity, we share why. What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish through this?
I felt like too, you're showing them what the top of the mountain looks like before the hike, like you're showing them how beautiful things are going to be when we finish this.
Absolutely. I love that analogy because it's also not mapping out the trail for them to get to the top of the mountain. That's micromanaging. It's what the top of the mountain looks like. And then your team member finds the path, and that becomes really powerful and meaningful for them. The second step is, what does good look like? Do we have an example of what's success for this product or this activity or this task? Can we be specific about what the quality, what we think quality is? So oftentimes we gloss over this and we say, I want you to create a great work plan. And our objective is a work plan that it tells us where things stand and status, et cetera. But we don't actually get into what good looks like in a work plan, that it shows detailed activities. Yeah.
I want to focus on the downside of not doing that, because you tell a great story about Diane, a woman named Diane, who really fails to tell her report what good looks like. And he thinks he's doing a great job. Yeah.
The story of Diane, and this is both one story and something that I've seen subsequent times with new managers, especially in startups. We say we want someone to be really proactive on our team. So we say, we have an expectation for you to be proactive. We want proactive team members, and that's super important for our company. And so then we pat ourselves on the back because we say, I just set a clear expectation. I've told my team member that I want to be proactive, that I want them to be proactive. And so the team member thinks he's being proactive and goes about his merry way. And then the manager is really upset and frustrated because the team member isn't being proactive. The challenge is that we've never defined what proactive is in our minds. So we didn't define that on my team and for my direct reports. Proactive is sending an agenda 24 hours before our one-on-one meetings. Proactive in my mind is coming to me with solutions instead of just problems when you identify an issue. Proactive is doing as much strategic thinking as you can about an issue as opposed to just doing desk research.
It feels like taking these kind of strategic overarching things and making them more tactile. Like Absolutely. What specifically do you do that makes it a win?
Yeah. And not just new managers, most managers, they get to that first level, but they don't go to those subsequent levels that really get specific and get tactical.
Yeah, I'm right there. We have a team, and I feel like when a lot of the time, to your friend's dad's point, when my team doesn't meet expectations, it's usually that I didn't lay out the right stuff. In this case with Diane, by the way, similar to the Michael story, they had to let this guy go, and he was so surprised because he thought he was knocking the cover off the ball, to use a baseball analogy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to take a little detour there because I thought that was really important. The next step.
So then the next step is just, what's the timing? When do we want something by? How much time should be spent doing this task? And again, a lot of new managers just don't state the timing. We have a fear of stepping on someone's toes or, again, being bossy. And so we aren't clear around the timing that's needed for a project. And then the fourth is providing examples. As best you can as a manager, provide examples of work product or information or content that aligns with the objective of this task you've assigned. Share things that have worked in the past. Share what good looks like to you so that your team member can get closer and closer to understanding what you truly expect from them.
I feel like we worry, as I'm listening to you talk, I feel like we worry too much about being a micromanager, right? That we don't worry enough maybe about being granular. And you've got a story about a guy actually during your internship. I think was his name Josh Hardy? Was it Josh Hardy?
That name has been changed.
Well, Josh, well, you actually pay him a compliment. I mean, you really, it doesn't start off as a compliment because you say that he's like a bad mullet, right? Business in front and business in the back, where everybody else at this internship is getting along with their boss. Your guy's kind of nitpicky. He's doing all these little things, but this ended up working out really well.
Yeah, I owe my career success to what we called him No Party Josh Hardy. Just because he was nitpicky. I mean, it was likely not comfortable for him, not fun for him, not enjoyable to give me constant feedback. But he took his role as a manager very seriously and understood that this was his responsibility. And he gave me constant feedback around ways I could improve. I rolled my eyes and groaned and complained about him behind his back. But over time, I realized that he set me off on a different trajectory by really having the courage to give me hard feedback from the get-go.
Why do we dislike feedback so much?
Oh, so many reasons. The one I think is most important and not often talked about is we dislike feedback because it feels like a threat to our social standing, to our identity, to who we are as people. And so when we receive feedback, we actually code feedback the same way that we code a physical threat, like a lion chasing us, back when we were cavemen and women. And so we immediately get defensive and it feels immediately uncomfortable. So it's in our biological nature to hate feedback because it feels like a threat.
I was told at an early job when I was with American Express, in fact, one of my first managers at American Express gave me some great feedback. He said, I've had to learn, Joe, that when I give you feedback, I can't look at you because if I look at you while I'm giving you feedback, your eyes are staring daggers into me and everything about you is saying, F off. And he said, but then, so I think as Joe leaves the room that he's not taking any of this, that he hates my guts. He goes, and then the weird thing is I got to think about what Joe's going to do the next day because Joe always comes in the next day and goes, okay, Jeff, I changed everything. I did all the stuff you said and I love it and it's great. So I've had to learn from that too, by the way, that feedback from him, that I have to kind of control my FU face when you're telling me what you think.
I love that story because one of the first pieces of feedback I got when I was a consultant was that I needed to control my facial expressions because it was too emotive. And I was so taken aback and so offended by this, like, oh, I can't, raise one eyebrow when a client says something that I don't like. They told me to practice talking in front of a mirror so that I could manage my facial expressions, manage them better. So I totally empathize with you on that one.
Did that work?
It did. It actually worked.
Yeah. Cause then you could see yourself then and imagine the other person then I think seeing you.
Yeah. And frankly, Zoom has helped a lot too, right? We now have a video of ourselves staring back at us when we're talking and when we're in meetings. Maybe
we should do them all by Zoom. No, I do not want to have a Zoom life. I got enough of that in 2020. Giving feedback to people, I think is super hard. How do we give feedback? And I want to point out two different people that I have trouble giving feedback to. Number one, over my career, giving feedback to people who are older than me, right? Being in a management situation or a leadership situation, and I've got somebody who I have to give feedback to who clearly has more experience than I do. And then second, there's, even rock stars need feedback, and giving somebody who's doing phenomenally well, giving them feedback about that will make them perform even better. How do you address those?
Yeah, the first one, this one comes up a lot, especially in startup organizations where people are promoted to a position of management and then other people join the organization who are older and far more experienced than them. There's two things. The first is just a general kind of rule of thumb I take with when we're in positions of management like that is being vulnerable and making sure you share what you don't know with the people you're managing. And so you're okay saying, I don't know, or
being a little vulnerable.
It's really important as opposed to coming across as super confident and super cocky to someone who has 15 years more experience than you. And that just falls completely flat. So saying, I haven't done this as long as you, but I observed this in our meeting, and this is how it affected the team, and then have a conversation about it. So feedback, I find, starting from an objective place of data, just explaining the situation, helps to lower the emotion of the conversation. I think the other important thing is a feedback conversation isn't about right versus wrong. It's about how I perceived your behavior and how that behavior impacted me or impacted the team or impacted the client. And let's have a conversation around that behavior and how it might change or it could be improved upon. It's not a litigating, you did this wrong, I did this right. Who's going to win this discussion, which is often how we approach it.
Well, and I feel like, Rachel, that's why your discussion about giving feedback often, I think, is super important, because I feel like if you've got this feedback loop where you're getting feedback from somebody a lot, it's going to feel a lot less confrontational, right? If I'm used to you and I giving each other feedback quite a bit, it's all of a sudden now we just have a growth mentality. We're all trying to get better.
It's part of how we work, what we do, who we are. The worst is feedback that's really surprising, or, we think, why now? You haven't given me feedback in 6 months. Right. And now today you decide to give me feedback. What did I do? This must be huge. Am I getting fired tomorrow if now you decide to give me feedback? And
especially if then it's something small, right? If it's something really little, then after 6 months, you're like, why this? Why today? This must be huge.
Absolutely.
I noticed that your feedback loop, the way that you describe giving feedback to people, does not involve the sandwich concept.
I hate the sandwich. I hate the sandwich. We do the sandwich, let me give a piece of positive feedback, a piece of constructive feedback, and then a piece of positive feedback to soften the blow. Right? We think we're being nice. What ends up happening is we just muddy the message. So the person's confused, saying, well, am I getting constructive feedback right now? Or am I getting positive feedback? What's important? What's not important? As opposed to us just in a concise, precise, and direct way saying, hey, I observed this. This is the impact. And here's how you might change your behavior moving forward, and making it not a big deal. The sandwich just blows things up.
But if it is your first time giving feedback, you do have a step-by-step way that we should do that. Walk me through that.
Yeah. So it starts from a place of data and observation. So I might say, Joe, I observed that you came to our meeting 15 minutes late. So it's just an observation. And you might immediately say, I missed the bus. And that's the end of the feedback conversation. So I say, hey, I observed you came into the meeting 15 minutes late. I then explain how it affected me, the client, the project, the team. And this is really the why. Why am I giving this feedback? Why does it matter? Why is it important? So when you explain the impact, the person understands that this matters, as opposed to this is just a petty complaint that this person has. So, hey, Joe, I observed you came into the meeting 15 minutes late. It really impacted the team in that it derailed the meeting when we lost, 15 minutes of work time. And additionally, I felt slightly disrespected because you've come to my meetings late the last 3 times. And then importantly, you pause for clarification and ask questions and say, hey, what's your reaction to this? Or what do you think about this? And it gives the opportunity for a dialogue and a conversation. And then you end with suggesting a change in behavior. So what can this person do differently moving forward? And that last step is really important for 2 primary reasons. First, it shows that you care enough about the person that you've thought about how they can change their behavior. And the second is it shows that the feedback is actionable. It's not something that's intrinsic to who the person is and that they can't change. So if we give a piece of feedback that we don't have a way that the person can change, then is that the right piece? Is that the right feedback to be giving? So we want to make sure our feedback is actionable and that the person can change, as opposed to this is just who this person is and I'm nitpicking them on their personality. or something intrinsic to who they are.
That's so powerful. And I'm thinking as you're speaking about how the best feedback I think that I ever received aligns 100% with what you just outlined. And I've never had an outline of the points, but this woman, Renee, who was in charge of the speakers at American Express. And I just been in public speaking for maybe 6 months on behalf of the company. She gave me the feedback that I was always 10 minutes late. She took me aside the third time and said, this is the third time that you're 10 minutes late. She said, and what's frustrating is you are so talented at what you do. You are so incredibly talented and you have so much help that you can be to the organization. And yet I don't know that you know this, but nobody takes you seriously because you always show up late and you're clearly not taking us seriously. I was never late again, Rachel. I was never once late again. And then she taught me how to make sure that I wasn't late again. It was, oh my goodness. It was 30 years ago and it still is like a punch in the gut every time I think about how I disrespect people when I'm late.
I mean, Renee gave you a gift. I like to call feedback like underwear. It's a gift you don't really want, but you really need.
I read you
get
writing
underwear for your birthday. I don't want it, but I know I need it. And she gave you this gift that has stuck with you and has probably allowed you to be who you are today. You probably wouldn't have realized the impact that your behavior of being late was having on other people.
Agreed. And I, as you wrote that underwear sentence in your book, I thought about my grandma always gave us on Christmas afternoons. We'd always have to go over to my grandma's house and I didn't want to go because I just gotten a bunch of new toys and I wanted to play with them. And then B, I knew I was getting socks and underwear. And I think about now what a gift that was.
What a gift. Absolutely.
On that note, looking the other way, you talk about being a manager and the fact that you need feedback. And I also laughed because you wrote that, when you ask for feedback as a manager, if you don't do it well, they're like, yeah, you're great. Because your manager controls your next evaluation. So there's going to be a little bit of suck up to the manager going on. How do you get true feedback from the people around you that you really need when you're managing them?
Yeah, it's so scary to give feedback to your manager. And so as a manager, it's one of your responsibilities and your jobs is to solicit feedback from your team members. So straightforward way of doing it is asking your team members for feedback and giving them kind of the invitation to the dance. But what often happens is they'll say, nothing, you're wonderful. Oh my gosh, you're the best manager ever. I wouldn't want to work for anyone else but you. So there's a couple reasons to get away from that. The first is be really specific with your questions. So you're giving a presentation to clients and the meeting's over and you ask your team who are more junior than you, hey, how did I do? And they say you did great. As opposed to saying, could you please provide me one example of how I could improve my presentation for the next time around? What ends up happening is we build the muscle of feedback and the muscle of dissent in our team members. So they start to feel more and more comfortable saying things to you that they might have originally thought would be offensive or hard for you to hear. So we build that muscle. Another way of building that muscle is when you're talking through a decision that you made or launching an initiative, have someone on your team be the devil's advocate for your decision. And it is their role to speak up and speak out against your decision. And so they start to get better and better at saying things that are hard. And you can really build that muscle of feedback in your team members.
I would think, again, you want to do that often as well.
Absolutely. You make it part of your practice. So it becomes second nature. And then as new team members join, they see other team members giving you feedback and you receiving it graciously and openly. And then they understand, oh, this is what we do on our team. We give our manager feedback. Oh, I'll feel comfortable doing this too. It's out in the open and it really becomes part of your team's culture.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You talk about so many things today. We went over just individuals, teams, and managing yourself. I want to end this with something that I think is super powerful, which is you point out to new managers, don't make somebody else responsible for your development. Be the king or queen of your own development. Talk about how I do that.
Yeah. So a lot of times we just expect our organization writ large to tell us what to do and to tell us where to develop and to tell us the capabilities or skills we want to build. I think it's really important for us to think through, where do I want to develop? How can I be empowered to chart the path that I want to take, and then go out and seek the resources and build the capabilities that are required to do that? I use a quick example that ties into the first thing we talked about. A lot of folks say, in my long-term development, I want to be a manager. That's my long-term development goal. And then we wait to get a direct report assigned to us. And that's when we, quote unquote, become a manager, as opposed to, I want to become a manager. So what are all the skills and capabilities that are required to be a manager? And let me go start building them now and seeking out places in my organization where I can test and practice those skills that are required to be a great manager.
The book is called Bringing Up the Boss, Practical Lessons for New Managers. It's a fantastic handbook. Rachel, I'm assuming we can get this everywhere?
Okay, get it everywhere. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks for hanging out and nerding out about being a good boss and about No Party Josh Hardy. I appreciate it.